Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. Welcome to the final episode of the 2026 Tier 1. Tier 1 includes all the albums I've listened to since the beginning of this year. The first 6 weeks are using these albums to set the standard for everything we listen to for 2026, both old and new, to try to figure out what the best music that we get to introduce this year could be. So we're going to start off this time around with Imogen Heap's Speak for Yourself. Now, in my mind, Imogen Heap sort of exists a little bit out of time, to be honest, because I think she really belongs in the pantheon of really great art rock musicians that kind of emerged in the late 70s. Peter Gabriel, Kate Bush, Laurie Anderson. But at the same time, the music that she makes couldn't have been made any time but at the time that she made it. This album was released in 2005. And what you see Imogen Heap doing here, as she would do throughout her entire career, is interacting with the technology that was available at the time, not to redefine her identity, but to clarify it. The result is an album that's both intricately constructed, but also emotionally immediate. And it kind of serves as a blueprint for how technology can deepen what it means to be human rather than distance yourself from it. Heap's forward-thinking approach is grounded in discipline. She's classically trained, but she's one of the few musicians I think who's really able to transcend the baggage that's associated with classical training and really apply that discipline towards experimentation and innovation. In making this album, she was very meticulous about logging like tempos and key signatures to make sure she wasn't being redundant or wasn't repeating herself in any way, and treating each track almost like it was a puzzle that needed to be solved. And the resulting level of detail is striking. Every texture, every small nuance of layering, it's all meticulously and intensely put together. And yet for all of the album's technical sophistication, it never loses its emotional core. Imogen Heap clearly has a propensity towards intellectualism, but she never allows that to cause distance to occur between her and the listener. She's able to remain vulnerable, even sometimes disarmingly so. And the classic song Hide and Seek is a very simple, really, if you look at it from a technical standpoint, just her singing with a vocoder. But its emotional clarity is enough to stop the listener in their tracks. That and many other examples on Speak for Yourself are reminders that innovation doesn't have to be complex to be effective. It just has to be purposeful. Here, curious purposefulness is one of those things that's really often made me wonder why it is that Imogen Heap isn't more of a household name than she is. It's kind of a paradox because some of her music has found its way into the sort of cultural memory. That song Hide and Seek was featured on an episode of The OC. And apparently the song Headlock is taken on a new life as a background for TikTok memes, or so my daughter tells me. She still seems to sit just outside of mainstream visibility, and probably because she doesn't really fit into a singular narrative. She's a little bit too unorthodox to be pop, but still too pop to be really accepted as avant-garde. But really what holds it all together is her specific voice, both literal and figurative, phenomenological. Her concept is so clear, and it's able to speak through these layers of technology and production, but in ways that never cover up her vision. Instead, they bring it into sharper and more clear focus.
I don't believe any of it. You said you like to start with your heart in a headlock. You know you're better than this. Afraid to start, got your heart in a headlock. I don't believe any of it. You said you like to start with your heart in a headlock. You know you're better than this.
Next up I got King Sunny Ade's Odu. I was first introduced to King Sunny Ade through his album Juju Music. Now that album is a landmark album in what we call world music, which of course is a problematic term if you look at it too closely, but just for the sake of argument, let's call it that. Odu was released just short of 2 decades from Juju Music in 1998. And what I find most fascinating about it is how well it preserves King Sunny Ade's essential style. It sounds very much like what happened on Juju Music, even though it's almost 20 years removed. King Sunny Ade's place in global music kind of solidifies the importance of this album, I think. In the late 70s, Bob Marley started to rise to prominence as a global music figure. Record companies started looking at other cultures to find ways to fill out their roster in a similar way. And he was signed almost in a way as like a counterbalance to Fela Kuti, where Fela Kuti was very confrontational and political. Conversely, King Sunny Ade is very celebratory, he's very communal, and his music expresses this spiritual vitality. And that distinction is not really a limitation, it's a philosophical difference. Where Fela Kuti would confront, King Sunny Ade would invite. So by the time of this recording, King Sunny Ade was already a global figure in the global music scene. His style of African music is called Juju music, and he was very well known for combining traditional Yoruba styles and palm wine guitar with more contemporary African fusion styles. One of his most signature innovations was to incorporate the sound of steel guitar into the group. But sometimes these kinds of decisions don't happen out of necessarily for innovation, sometimes just out of necessity, because his original concept was to use this very specific kind of African violin. But he couldn't take these out on the road very well. They didn't travel well overseas. So he just started substituting steel guitar as a stand-in for it, and that became part of the sound of King Sunny Ade's music. In addition to steel guitars, King Sunny Ade's band was very, very large, 18 musicians, and the instrumentation was centered on talking drums and interlocking guitars and layered rhythms. All these different elements would come together to interlock and create this vibrant, energetic feel. And King Sunny Ade himself, as a guitarist and band leader, really sought to unify the group with this sort of spiritual energy. The result is music that feels communal at every level, woven into the very polyrhythmic fabric of the music. So while Juju music may carry a stronger sense of discovery, Odu actually has the benefit of refinement to it. The sound of Odu is familiar, but it's not stagnant, and it reflects a mature artist fully inhabiting his language. So in that sense, Odu functions both as continuation and affirmation, a musical vision rooted in Yoruba tradition, shaped by global experience, and sustained through communal performance.
Sunny Ade kan yín làwa mọ̀, bó jẹ́ tèrè afẹ́. Sunny Ade kan yín làwa mọ̀, ọba àríyá. Ojú ìbùkún rọ̀ sórí wa làwa ń ṣọpẹ́. Ẹ bá mi lùlù ara, ilé sómi gbọ̀n jólójóló. Ẹ lùlù ara, kí bàrá ìdí mi gidigidi. Èyí pọ̀ o.
Next by Spidergawd from 8 to Infinity. From 8 to Infinity is a study in momentum. It uses the past not as nostalgia, but as propulsion. It's built on the foundations of hard rock and the new wave of British heavy metal. And that allows it to occupy this weird, liminal space between the 70s and the 80s. Yet it refuses to sound dated. Instead, Spidergawd treats that lineage as a living current, using it to propel their 8th album forward. The references are clear, but they're never really imitative. You got Thin Lizzy's dual guitars, you got the sound of Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, and all filtered through a contemporary approach that brushes up against the Foo Fighters from time to time. Psych and stoner rock kind of browned out the palette, but ultimately, From 8 to Infinity is a songwriting album. Melody first, hook-driven, and structurally tight. What really sets Spidergawd apart, I think, is how they expand that framework. To me, the inclusion of baritone saxophone on this album is really, really interesting and really, really compelling, because it's not ever really featured out there in front. There's not a huge saxophone solo section in any of the songs. Instead, it's used to maybe double lead guitar lines. It's used to add harmony to lines that are already there, or maybe to round out the bottom end, add a certain growl to the bass end. It's a textual choice that enriches the music without ever really calling attention to itself. And that's a sign of thoughtful arrangement rather than experimentation for its own sake. The album moves with controlled intensity. I would call its pacing at times maybe even furious, but it's never overwhelming. Each track is carefully constructed with melodic lines and vocal arrangements that invite participation. I would almost say there's almost a cheap trick overtone to some of the choruses here that have such an anthemic, singable quality that is obviously designed to be shared. That communal pull kind of anchors the record, even as it kind of veers in a darker, more gothic style, musically speaking. Songwriter and lead band Per Borden kind of went through a period of injury and sickness in the time leading up to the writing of this album. And some of the lyrics, if you look at them close enough, you can see there's a sense of intimacy that contrasts the outward force of the music. The result is a compelling duality, wind-blown and expansive on the surface, but grounded and personal underneath. Ultimately, I think From 8 to Infinity succeeds because it understands what really drives rock forward. It's not just raw aggression. It's drive, melody, and connection. And Spidergawd doesn't go on to reinvent this form. Instead, they inhabit it fully, allowing that history to feel immediate.
We'll end up walking in our sleep tonight. You know we're about to go from a harvest rise to the endless night. You know there's no resolution staring in your eyes come the morning light.
And finally, I got The Cure, Disintegration. I think this album is going to cause the most trouble for the tournament this year, simply because for many people it is an undisputed classic, and it's not hard to see why. If you're a person like me who had kind of gotten familiar with The Cure during their pop period, your perceptions of what The Cure are about might be a little bit skewed, and that's part of the reason why Disintegration is the way it is. It is a reaction to The Cure's popularity. Robert Smith, at the time he was creating this album, was just about to turn 30, so he was having a little bit of an early midlife crisis and was also struggling with the success of The Cure as they were kind of leaning more towards pop sounds. And so with the help of some hallucinogens, Robert Smith took a look at what it was that made The Cure tick in the first place and tried to get back into that. Now, the early Cure albums were dark, moody, and gothic and angst-ridden. And he wanted to get back to that dark feeling, but now rather than having angst fueling him, it was disillusionment. And the result is an album that really surprised me as to its textural and atmospheric depth. I really got into The Cure really as an album band for the very first time just last year from their album Songs from a Lost World. And many people commented on that album saying that if you like that one, you should check out Disintegration. I could definitely see the connection between those two. They have a similar dark vibe to them, which again was to me very surprising because always my perception of the Cure had been their more pop side. This album really reveals them to be purveyors of atmospheric sound design as much as they are pop songwriters. Layers of synth and guitar and effects blur into this huge, immense, and vast ocean, sprinkled in with details like that really glassy organ sound at the beginning of Love Song, so distinctive and so haunting that it really captures the listener's attention. This stylistic pivot towards darker atmospheres positioned The Cure as almost predictors of what was going to be coming in the early 90s. Because as much as people like to look at them at this point, call them post-punk or goth, this is also very clearly, to me, heading towards shoegaze, heading towards dream pop. And these are styles that would emerge in the early 90s to come to fruition later on, even in further decades. But it's also what I think makes this album feel so timeless is that not only was it self-encapsulated and existed in its own world, but either by influence or precognition, it aligned itself with stylistic trends that would unfold over the next 2 or 3 decades. And there are flashes on Disintegration of The Cure's more pop tendencies that had emerged before, but very often some of these songs break form entirely. They drift off and drift back in, always taking time to allow the textures to unfold, giving the songs an opportunity to exist in suspension. So the listener isn't pushed towards catharsis, but instead invited to sit and listen within the feeling.
Whenever I'm alone with you, you make me feel like I am home again. Whenever I'm alone with you, you make me feel like I am whole again.
That's all I got for you guys this time around, and for 2026's Tier 1. All the albums we've covered so far this year are currently in a tournament situation with each other, being narrowed down from 48 albums to 24. Those 24 albums are going to go on and compete in Tier 2 against a new set of albums over the next 4 months. If you'd like to be a part of that tournament, which I call my discourse, please sign up for my Patreon below. If you find all these albums and their examples fascinating, please head over to my Spotify. I've got a big list where there's going to be representative tracks from all these albums that's going to be expanding throughout the years we go along. So I hope you guys will join us as we go forward to Tier 2. And until you see you then, I'll catch you guys on the flip side.